At my wife's funeral, my son leaned over the polished mahogany casket and whispered, "Dad, do you have her bank passwords?" Before the first handful of dirt even touched the lid. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're listening from in the comments. It really helps me share more stories like this. Thank you. My name is David. I'm 67, a retired supply chain manager who still irons his shirts on Sundays out of habit. My wife Margaret called that ritual proof that you can straighten what life wrinkles, and I loved her for it. We were married for 42 years, long enough to bury 3 dogs, plant 5 maple trees, and raise 1 son, Ethan. Margaret had a laugh like cut glass in sunlight. Ethan has her green eyes but not her patience. The morning of the funeral arrived in a quiet that felt wrong. The church smelled like lilies and lemon oil. Mourners spoke in the soft, careful voices people reserve for libraries and grief. I shook hands, nodded, accepted casseroles and condolences as if I were signing for deliveries. "Thank you." "Yes." She was. All the while, Ethan paced the narthex, checking his watch, speaking into his phone with his chin tucked down like he was negotiating a contract. Grief looks different on everyone. On my son it looked like urgency. When the last hymn faded, a hush settled. I ran my hand along the casket one final time, feeling the seam where wood meets brass. That's when Ethan stepped close, eyes bright, jaw tight. "Dad," he murmured, "we should meet with her bank today. These things get complicated. If we move fast." "Today," I repeated. He blinked, unbothered by the weight of the moment. "It's just practical. We'll keep it simple. Accounts, titles, signatures. I can help." His hand hovered over my arm, hovering like he might steer me. Margaret would have said, "Breathe, David." So I did. I breathed, and with that breath I felt the envelope against my chest, the one I had slipped into my inside jacket pocket when I dressed, the one Margaret had sealed 3 months before her death and handed me with eyes too calm for someone in pain. "Open it only if you must," she'd said. "And if you ever feel pressured, don't. Wait. Watch." Ethan didn't see my hand touch the envelope. He only saw me hesitate, and he interpreted that as permission to continue. "I already called the realtor about the lake house," he said almost cheerfully. "Inventory's tight. We could get an offer within a week. Also, if we move the brokerage accounts." "Ethan." My voice surprised me, steadier than I felt. "Your mother is being put in the ground." His mouth pressed into a line. He nodded as if he'd heard me and then said, "Brokerage first. Then the house." Everything in me wanted to believe this was logistics, his way of coping. But the speed, the precision, the way he used we when he met me, it sparked a quiet alarm. I thought of Margaret's envelope again, of the day she gave it to me, a gray afternoon, tea cooling on the tray she refused to let me carry, our old clock stuttering in the hall. "I made a choice," she'd said then, tracing the rim of her cup. "Not because I don't love our son David, but because I've watched how he looks at money, as if it fixes character instead of revealing it. If anything happens, you'll know what to do." What she had left me was not a number but a principle, and a plan hidden behind it. After the graveside prayers, people peeled away. The wind lifted the tent flaps, rattling the metal stakes in the wet soil. My sister-in-law hugged me hard and said to call if I needed anything, which is to say, call if you need to talk. Casseroles had already been handled. When we were finally alone, Ethan took off his sunglasses. Without them, he looked younger and more tired, and for a heartbeat I saw the boy who used to fall asleep in Margaret's lap during storm season. "Dad, this is the right time," he said. "The banks are open. We go now, we can lock down access. I'll drive." "You'll drive," I repeated as if trying the phrase on my tongue. He smiled, quick and thin. "I've already texted Aunt Carol to watch the house in case anyone shows up. These things get complicated," I finished for him. "So you said." He looked pleased I had remembered. We walked to the car. My cane tapped the gravel. The cane is new, a concession to a knee that refuses to accept normal wear and tear. Ethan opened the passenger door and waited, and as I lowered myself into the seat, he said it again, too casually as if we were deciding between takeout and leftovers. "If we transfer the main account today, it'll save us a headache." The main account. He didn't know about the other one, the one that wasn't main but central because it held what Margaret had called room to breathe. She'd insisted it was for me should life require more dignity than a pension offers. She'd structured it in a way that baffled me and impressed our attorney. Beneficiaries named, contingencies vesting, a note attached to the file that read, "Private. Speak to David only." On the drive, Ethan kept up a stream of logistics. He wanted statements pulled, logins reset, cards reissued. He said words like probate and short sale, and market timing, and clean exit, with the upbeat cadence of a podcast host. I watched the flat winter fields pass, old barns bending under the weight of their own roofs, and felt Margaret's envelope heat against my chest like a secret brand. At the bank, the manager recognized me. We'd opened our first joint account there in 1986, when interest rates still felt like real numbers and the teller put a paper lollipop in the tray for toddler Ethan to discover. Now, a young associate ushered us into a small office with a glass wall and a bowl of peppermints. Ethan sat forward, elbows on knees, phone on the table like a third elbow. "I'm sorry for your loss," the associate said, hands folded. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. "How can we help today?" "My father needs to secure access to my mother's accounts," Ethan said, answering for me. "We'll need to be added as co-signers moving forward and begin consolidating. He's not great with online banking." The associate's gaze slid to me. "Sir?" "I'm capable," I said. "But I appreciate assistance." I rested a hand on the envelope through the fabric of my jacket. "For today, I'd like copies of all statements and to confirm beneficiary designations." "Nothing moves." Ethan shot me a look, surprised, irritated. "Dad, the whole point?" "Nothing moves," I repeated, and the associate nodded, relieved to have clear instructions. While she left to print, Ethan leaned in, voice low. "This will take longer if we don't start now. Fees rack up. Probate will eat us alive." "I'm not afraid of paperwork," I said. "Then what are you afraid of?" he asked, and the edge in his tone made the small office feel smaller. "I could have said losing your mother twice, once to death and once to this. I could have said the part of you that treats grief like a land speed record. Instead, I said nothing because silence was how Margaret and I learned to hear the truth in a room." The associate returned with a stack of paper and a stapler that sounded like a gavel. She set everything down. "These list the accounts where Mrs. Warren was primary," she said. "There's also a notation on one file that requires a manager's authorization to discuss." Ethan perked up. "That's the main one," he said confidently, as if naming a fish makes it jump into your net. I looked at the stapled corners. I knew which file had the notation. Margaret had said it that way. The associate continued, "I'll grab our branch manager so we can proceed appropriately." When she stepped out, Ethan exhaled sharply. "Good. We're moving." "We're reading," I corrected. He looked at me like I was being difficult for sport. "Dad, I know you're grieving. I'm too. But it's irresponsible to delay. I talked to a guy about the lake place. If we list by Friday?" "Your mother wanted to keep the lake house," I said. "She's gone?" he snapped, then softened, catching himself. "I just mean we have to be practical. You don't even go up there alone anymore." I thought of the dock planks warming beneath my bare feet every June, the hum of cicadas, Margaret's paperback face down on a towel, the way she'd point out across the water and say, "There, that slice of light. That one is ours." The notion of selling the lake place felt like pawning a memory for pennies. The branch manager arrived with careful condolences, sat and glanced at the notation. "Sir, for this account there is a private instruction. We can meet one-on-one to address it, per Mrs. Warren's request." Ethan's eyebrows shot up. "Why private?" The manager looked at me, not him. "Because that's what she wanted," I said. "We'll handle that meeting later." "Today," Ethan pressed. "Later," I repeated, and the manager inclined her head, relieved to have a direction she could follow without mediating a family dispute. We left with a folder thick enough to feel like it had weight beyond paper. In the parking lot, Ethan stopped short, turned to me, and let the mask of polite efficiency slip an inch. "Are you hiding something?" he asked. Wind flicked at his tie. Somewhere a car alarm chirped and went silent. I thought about giving him a piece of the truth, the safe piece. "I'm hiding a few hours that belong to your mother and me." Instead I said, "I'm honoring your mother's plans." "That sounds like hiding." He shoved his hands into his pockets. "I'm trying to prevent a mess." "Are you?" I asked gently. "Or are you trying to own it?" He flushed. For a second his face went blank, and I saw there the boy who once lied about breaking the neighbor's window and swore it was an accident long after the evidence suggested otherwise. Then he recovered. "You know what?" he said. "I'll make it simple." He took out his phone. "I just texted Karen. We're coming by tonight. We're going to go through Mom's files and get a master list. If you won't move, I will." "You'll go through our files?" I said, the plural deliberate. "Our?" he echoed, but the way he said it sounded like mine. He opened the car door for me again, but this time it felt less like courtesy and more like choreography, moving me along the stage he'd set. As I lowered myself in, the envelope shifted. I pressed a palm flat against my chest and felt the faint edge of the flap. Margaret's handwriting hovered in my head. Open only if you must. If you are pressured, don't. Wait. Watch. At home, after the inevitable parade of covered dishes and carefully pitched sympathy, the house dimmed around the edges. Evening makes honest men or liars of us all. I've seen both. I went to our bedroom, closed the door, and set the folder on the quilt Margaret had knit while watching the cubs fall short one summer too many. The room smelled faintly of her lavender lotion. I sat on the bed and took out the envelope. It was heavier than it looked. I held it long enough for second thoughts to file their petitions. Finally, I slid a finger under the seal and paused, listening as if I might hear a voice say not yet. From the hallway the front door opened. Ethan's voice carried through the house. Dad? We're here. Wait. The envelope lay open in my hand, papers pressed neatly inside, her looping script visible at the top of the first page. If you're reading this, my love, it means you've met resistance. I closed the flap again, did not remove the pages, tucked the envelope back into my jacket and stood. I would not show him, not tonight. Coming, I called, and as I reached for the doorknob, I felt something inside me settle, a quiet hinge clicking into place. I had chosen my path. I would stay silent. And if silence is a blade, then tonight I'd learned how to hold it without cutting myself. Grief has a strange way of echoing. Some nights it's loud, the kind of loud that rattles inside your ribs like a kettle on boil. Other nights it's hushed, like footsteps down an empty hall. After Margaret's funeral, the house was too quiet. The chair she used to sit in by the window stood empty, her blanket folded neatly across the armrest. I sat there anyway, trying to borrow her warmth from the fabric, but it was gone. What wasn't gone, though, was her foresight. Margaret was a woman who thought ahead the way sailors read tides. She anticipated storms before the first cloud. That's why, months before she passed, she had taken my hand across the kitchen table and told me a secret. David, she said softly, her fingers brushing mine, there's something you must know. It's about the account. At first I thought she meant our joint savings. But she shook her head. Not that one. This is different. Years ago, when Ethan started college, I opened a separate bank account. I never mentioned it. Over time, I added to it whenever I could. My inheritance from Aunt Rose, a portion of the stock dividends, even some money I earned quietly when I did consulting for the library board. It's not massive, but it's enough. Enough to protect you if things turn dark. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, startled. Because Ethan has eyes everywhere, she said with a sad smile. Not malicious, not at first. But he watches money the way a thirsty man watches a glass of water. He feels entitled to what isn't his. I saw it even when he was a boy. Birthday checks from your mother, graduation gifts, his first pay stub. He doesn't see money as a tool, David. He sees it as proof. Proof that he matters. She reached for the envelope I would later carry to her funeral. She placed it on the table between us. This account is in your name only. Beneficiary, you. Ethan cannot touch it. If you want to add him later, you can, but I don't advise it. I set it up with our attorney so it's private, restricted, and protected. Think of it as my last insurance against his greed. Her words stunned me. I wanted to argue to defend our son. But deep down I knew she was right. Ethan had grown from a curious child into a man who measured everything by gain. He had a good job, yes, but his debts followed him like shadows. Credit cards, risky investments, whispers of gambling. Margaret knew. She always knew. Promise me, she said then, her eyes locking onto mine, you won't mention it to him. Not unless you choose to. This account isn't for him. It's for you. For dignity. For freedom. I promised, and I kept that promise. The night after the funeral, Ethan came to the house. He carried a leather folder under his arm, not a casserole, not flowers. He kissed my cheek briskly like a man greeting a business partner. Dad, I've started organizing Mom's paperwork, he said without preamble. I found old insurance policies, property deeds. We should sit down and review everything. It's important we get ahead of this. I looked at him, my son, my only child, and felt the gulf between us widen. Ahead of what? I asked quietly. Probate, taxes, claims. I already called a financial advisor. He says if we consolidate assets quickly, we can save thousands. But I'll need you to sign over some authorizations. Sign over? I repeated, tasting the phrase. Yes. I'll manage the accounts, Dad. You've done enough. You're tired, grieving. Let me take the burden. His voice was smooth, but beneath it pulsed impatience. He wanted access, control, signatures. And he wanted them fast. I sat back in Margaret's chair, the envelope heavy in my pocket like a lead weight. Her handwriting burned in my mind. If you are pressured, don't. Wait. Watch. Ethan, I said carefully, your mother only just passed. We should respect her memory before rushing into papers. He sighed as if I were a stubborn client. Dad, this isn't about rushing. It's about protecting what's ours. What's mine, eventually. If we don't act, the system will eat it alive. There was, what's mine. He didn't even notice the slip. That evening, after he left in frustration, I went to the study. Margaret's books still lined the shelves, Jane Austen, medical journals, gardening guides. I pulled down the photo album from 1998. Ethan's graduation picture slipped from between the pages. There he was in cap and gown, smiling broadly. Margaret had written on the back, he thinks the world belongs to him. I hope one day he learns the world belongs to no one, it is only borrowed. I pressed the photo flat against the desk and whispered, you saw this coming, didn't you, Margaret? The next morning Ethan returned. This time he brought his wife, Karen. She was polite, her condolences rehearsed, but her eyes swept the room like a surveyor appraising property lines. Mr. Warren, she said gently, we know this is difficult, but Ethan and I only want to make things easier for you. You shouldn't have to handle all this alone. Why don't you let us take the financial load off your shoulders? I smiled thinly. You mean take the finances off my shoulders? She faltered, then recovered. We're family. It's only natural. Ethan placed a stack of papers in front of me. Dad, these are just preliminary forms. Power of attorney, joint access requests. Standard stuff. Standard stuff. 3 words that could strip me of everything. I didn't sign. Instead, I asked them both to leave. Ethan's jaw tightened. Karen muttered something about stubborn old men under her breath as she guided him out. When the door shut, I sat at the desk for a long time. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of decision. I could reveal the hidden account, use it as leverage, warn Ethan that his mother had anticipated his greed. But Margaret's words echoed again. If you are pressured, don't. Wait. Watch. So I waited. I watched. And what I saw in my son's eyes was no longer grief, no longer urgency. It was hunger. That night, as I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. An old man stared back, lines deep around the eyes, hair silvering. But behind those eyes burned a quiet resolve. Margaret had trusted me with her secret, not because she doubted me but because she knew I would need it. The account wasn't just money, it was power. A weapon if necessary. As I turned off the light, I realized something chilling. My son was no longer just impatient. He was plotting. And if I didn't hold my silence carefully, that plot would grow teeth. For the first time in my life, I saw Ethan not only as my child but as my adversary. And I knew the storm Margaret had foreseen was only just beginning. There's a difference between a visitor and an intruder. A visitor knocks, waits, and enters with respect. An intruder shows up whenever he pleases, as if the space already belongs to him. By the end of the first week after Margaret's funeral, Ethan had stopped being a visitor. He arrived without calling, sometimes twice a day. He'd bring his laptop, spread papers across my dining table, and speak as if the house were his office. I sat in Margaret's chair in the living room, cane balanced against my knee, listening as he called bankers and realtors, my name sprinkled into conversations like seasoning. Dad's ready to move quickly, he would say, glancing over at me without shame. He understands this is for the best. We'll sign soon. I never corrected him on the calls. I learned long ago that silence unsettles more than argument. Margaret used to say, you don't always need to shout, David. Let others talk long enough and they'll reveal who they are. And Ethan revealed plenty. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen to find Karen rummaging through the drawers. She startled when she saw me. Oh, Mr. Warren, she said, closing a folder too quickly. I was just trying to organize Mom's documents. I noticed the way she still called Margaret Mom, even though she and Ethan had been married only 5 years. It sounded more like a claim than affection. What documents? I asked. Insurance papers, bank slips, that sort of thing. Ethan said it's urgent we keep everything in order. For your sake. For my sake, I repeated, leaning on the counter. And where do you plan to keep them? She hesitated just a beat too long. With us, of course. Safer that way. I smiled thinly. I think they're safe here. Her cheeks flushed. She muttered something about helping and left the room. I sat down heavily, feeling Margaret's absence like a hollow in the air. She would have seen this coming too, a daughter-in-law with polite words but sharp eyes, treating the home like unclaimed territory. The gossip began soon after. My sister called to say she'd run into Ethan at the grocery store. He seemed worried about you, she said delicately. Said you've been forgetting things. That you repeated yourself 3 times about the same topic. I stiffened. I repeated myself because he wasn't listening. Well, he hinted that maybe you shouldn't be managing finances alone anymore. He said he was stepping up to help. Help. That word again. It felt less like an offer and more like a leash. One evening Ethan arrived carrying a sheaf of legal documents. He dropped them on the coffee table with a dramatic slap. Dad, this is ridiculous. You're dragging your feet. If you sign these, everything will be smoother. I looked down at the papers. Power of attorney. Transfer of assets. Durable guardianship in case of mental incapacity. Each page was a slow theft written in legalese. Have you read them? I asked calmly. He rolled his eyes. Of course I have. This is standard. Every advisor I spoke to said it's the smart move. You don't want to be stuck making decisions in your condition. My condition? You're grieving. You're elderly. You're not thinking straight. Look, Dad, I'm just trying to protect what Mom left behind. What your mother left behind, I corrected, wasn't meant to be seized like spoils from a battlefield. He bristled. I'm not seizing. I'm protecting. If you can't see that, maybe the court should. The room chilled. His eyes didn't look like Margaret's anymore. They looked like glass, cold, reflective, unyielding. After he stormed out that night, I opened Margaret's envelope again. I didn't read the documents inside, just ran my fingers along her handwriting on the flap. Wait, watch. So I waited. And I watched. And Ethan made himself easy to watch. He told neighbors I had trouble walking without assistance, though the cane was more nuisance than necessity. He hinted to his cousins that I sometimes forgot where I was going, though I had been the one driving them home last Thanksgiving while Ethan was too drunk to stand. He planted seeds of doubt in every ear he found. The cruelest was at church. After service, the pastor pulled me aside. David, I hear you've been having some trouble keeping up with bills. Ethan mentioned it. I blinked. I've never missed a payment in my life. The pastor gave a kind, pitying smile, the kind reserved for children and the infirm. Well, just know your congregation supports you. I left before the coffee hour, Margaret's absence pounding beside me like a second heart. Ethan wasn't just pushing. He was building a case. The breaking point came a week later. Ethan barged in late at night, papers in hand again. Enough, he said. If you won't sign willingly, I'll have to prove you're unfit. Karen and I have already spoken with an attorney. We'll petition for guardianship. That way you won't make mistakes that cost us all. Us all? I repeated softly. He stood over me, taller than he had been as a boy but somehow smaller too. His voice shook, not with fear but with fury. You're being selfish, Dad. This money, these assets, they're supposed to move forward, not rot with you. Either you cooperate or I'll force the issue. I looked up at him, this man I had once rocked to sleep, and realized I no longer saw my son. I saw a rival claimant, a predator in family clothing. I said nothing. Silence stretched between us, sharp as broken glass. He mistook it for weakness. You'll see, he muttered, gathering his papers. The court will believe me. Everyone already knows you're slipping. You're old, alone, confused. You won't stand a chance. He slammed the door behind him. I sat for a long while, cane across my lap, envelope warm in my pocket. Margaret's words pulsed in my ears. If you are pressured, don't. Wait. Watch. And as the night deepened, I finally understood. I wasn't only waiting. I was preparing. And I wasn't only watching. I was learning. Ethan thought silence meant surrender. He had no idea silence was strategy. There comes a point when family conflict stops being whispers in kitchens and becomes ink on paper. That moment arrived when a thick envelope slid through my mail slot one cold Tuesday morning. I picked it up with my cane tucked under my arm, my fingers brushing over the seal. The letterhead screamed Harrison and Pike, attorneys at law. My heart sank even before I opened it. Inside were words sharp enough to cut. A petition for guardianship filed by my son. Ethan was formally requesting that the court declare me unable to manage my own finances. He alleged memory issues, instability, confusion. He claimed I was at risk of financial exploitation, and that he, as my only child, needed authority to act in my stead. Margaret would have laughed at the irony, Ethan accusing me of being vulnerable to exploitation, when he himself was the predator. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where Margaret once placed her secret envelope before me, and read every line. The lies were dressed in professional phrasing. He had even attached affidavits from neighbors. Mr. Warren often seems lost, he repeats questions. He sometimes forgets his cane in public. Small, ordinary slips of aging twisted into a case for incompetence. I closed the file and set it down. My tea had gone cold. Later that day Ethan arrived, smugness barely contained. "I assume you got the letter," he said, tossing his coat on Margaret's chair as if it belonged to him. "I did." "Good. This way everything will be official. Once the court grants guardianship, I can consolidate accounts, pay bills, protect assets. It's really for the best." "For the best?" I repeated, my voice calm. He nodded, pacing the room. "Dad, you don't understand how fragile all this is. One bad signature, one late payment, and the estate falls apart. The lake house could be lost. The investments could evaporate. But under my control, everything stays safe. You'll thank me." I studied him. The boy who once begged me to teach him how to ride a bike was now circling me like a vulture. "You're sure this is for protection?" I asked. "Of course," he said too quickly. "You can't handle it anymore. Everyone sees that. Why fight what's obvious?" I said nothing. Silence again, my oldest ally. That evening, I drove into town with the envelope Margaret had left me. My attorney, Mr. Gaines, was a careful man, mid-50s, silver hair, glasses that made him look like he was perpetually double-checking the world. He greeted me with warmth that wasn't pity, which was rare these days. "David," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "I'm sorry for your loss. And I think I know why you're here." I handed him the envelope and the petition Ethan had filed. He opened the first, spread the documents across his desk, and adjusted his glasses. The papers Margaret had left were immaculate. Updated wills, trust agreements, and most importantly, an addendum written in her own hand, signed, dated, notarized. In it, she made her intentions unmistakable. "This separate account is solely for my husband, David Warren. It is not to be included in any shared estate proceedings, nor is it subject to distribution to heirs. This is my explicit wish. Should any challenge arise, this document shall serve as my testament that my husband retains full and sole ownership." Mr. Gaines leaned back, impressed. "Your wife was meticulous. She must have known this could happen." "She did," I said quietly. He tapped the petition Ethan had filed. "He doesn't stand a chance, not with this. In fact, this may backfire on him. Courts don't look kindly on frivolous guardianship petitions, especially when the accused can show clear competence and has protective documents in place." I exhaled slowly. "So I fight him in court?" Gaines nodded. "Yes. But you won't just fight. You'll win." Days passed and the gossip worsened. At the grocery store, Mrs. Carter, who had lived 2 doors down for 40 years, touched my arm gently. "David, honey, are you all right? Ethan told me you sometimes forget to pay your bills." "I've never missed a bill in my life," I said, but she only patted my hand as if I were a child insisting the sky was green. At church, whispers followed me down the pews. Friends I had known since college looked at me with concern, not respect. Ethan's narrative was working. But I remembered Margaret's advice: wait, watch. So I waited and I watched. And I let Ethan dig his own pit. The week before the hearing, Ethan confronted me directly. He arrived unannounced as usual, this time with Karen in tow. "Dad," he said, dropping into the chair opposite me, "this doesn't have to be messy. If you just sign over access to me, I'll withdraw the petition. We can keep this out of court." Plain. Dignified. Karen chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet. "We only want to spare you embarrassment, Mr. Warren. People will think you're unstable. It could be painful." I looked between them, at the greed hidden behind the masks of concern. Margaret had been right all along. "You want me to sign my dignity away," I said. Ethan's eyes hardened. "It's not dignity if you can't manage it. This is the only way forward. Otherwise you'll stand in court and be humiliated. And I'll win anyway." He leaned in close. "In a few weeks, Dad, you won't have a penny left that you can touch without me." I didn't flinch. I simply let the silence stretch until he grew uncomfortable. Finally I stood, cane steady under my hand, and said, "We'll see." When they left, I went upstairs to the bedroom. The folder of Margaret's documents lay on the dresser, beside the lavender perfume bottle she'd left half full. I opened the folder again, tracing her handwriting on the addendum. Margaret had outthought Ethan before he even began. She had given me the shield I would need. And in court I would wield it. The morning of the hearing, I stood in front of the mirror. My suit was pressed, my tie straight. Ethan would expect a frail old man, trembling, confused. What he would see instead was composure. As I walked into the courthouse, cane tapping the marble floor, I felt Margaret beside me. Not in ghostly whispers, but in the certainty of her planning, her foresight. Ethan sat at the petitioner's table, smirking, whispering to his attorney. Karen squeezed his arm, eyes shining with anticipation. They thought they had already won. I sat down across from them, folder of documents in my lap. My attorney leaned toward me. "Are you ready?" I nodded. More ready than Ethan could possibly imagine. Courtrooms have their own weather. Some are heavy with air conditioning, others smell of old carpet and paper, but all of them carry the storm of human conflict. The morning of the hearing, as I stepped inside with my cane, I felt that storm gather above us. Ethan was already there, sleek in a tailored suit he could barely afford, Karen beside him like an accessory. He smiled when he saw me, a smile too thin to be warmth, too wide to be confidence. It was the smile of a gambler who had bet everything and was waiting for the cards to flip. "Dad," he said in the hallway, tone dripping with false sympathy. "This doesn't have to be ugly. Just tell the judge you're overwhelmed, let me handle your affairs, and we'll all walk out happy." "Happy," I repeated. "Is that what this looks like to you?" His jaw tightened. "It will once I'm in control." Inside the courtroom, the judge called us to order. Ethan's attorney stood, painting a portrait of a confused old man, me, who had become incapable of managing life. He cited forgetfulness, reliance on others, increasing instability. He spoke as if he had lived in my house, watched me lose keys, stumble over bills. Ethan nodded along, occasionally lowering his gaze as if embarrassed by his father's supposed decline. Karen dabbed her eyes with a tissue for effect. When it was my turn, my attorney rose. "Your Honor, these allegations are not only unfounded but malicious. My client is of sound mind, capable of managing his affairs. We have evidence to show not only his competence but his late wife's clear intentions regarding their estate." I watched Ethan's smile falter. But the judge was cautious. "Let's hear from Mr. Warren himself," she said. So I stood. Cane steady, voice calm, I addressed the room. "Your Honor, I am grieving. I am old. But I am not incapable. My wife knew me better than anyone, and she knew our son as well. She prepared for this moment, because she foresaw what greed can do to a man." I pulled the folder from my briefcase and handed it to my attorney, who presented it to the judge. Inside were Margaret's documents, the trust addendum, her handwritten note, the notarized statements. The judge read silently, the courtroom hushed. At last she looked up. "This document leaves no ambiguity. Mrs. Warren designated specific assets to her husband alone, outside of the estate. She expressed concern about interference and requested that these wishes be respected." Ethan shifted in his seat, color draining from his face. The judge continued. "Mr. Warren shows no evidence of incapacity. This petition borders on frivolous. Unless the petitioner has substantial proof, which I do not see, I am inclined to dismiss." My attorney leaned toward me and whispered, "We've won." But winning in court was only part of the battle. Outside, after dismissal, Ethan caught up with me. His mask of civility had cracked. His voice hissed with venom. "You think this is over?" he said. "You humiliated me in there." "I didn't humiliate you," I replied. "You did that yourself." He stepped closer. "You can't hold on to everything forever. You'll slip. You'll forget. And when you do, I'll be there." His words chilled me, not because of the threat itself but because of the emptiness behind his eyes. He no longer saw me as a father. He saw me as an obstacle. Karen tugged at his arm, urging him away, but he shook her off. "This isn't done, Dad. You can't beat me forever." I didn't answer. Silence again, the knife he still didn't recognize. That night, I returned home exhausted but resolved. I opened Margaret's documents again, tracing her signature. She had prepared for this exact war, and I had defended her legacy. But something inside me shifted. Court had been the formal battlefield, yes. But the real war was personal, fought in looks, in whispers, in the hollow space between father and son. I went to my study, pulled open a locked drawer, and took out the folder where I kept copies of Ethan's debts. Loans unpaid, investments gone sour, gambling markers from the casino 3 towns over. I had collected them quietly, not out of malice but out of foresight. Now they felt like ammunition. Margaret had given me a shield. Perhaps it was time I found a sword. The breaking point came days later. Ethan stormed into the house again, this time without knocking. His face was red, his hands trembling. "You embarrassed me," he spat. "Do you know what people are saying? That I tried to rob my own father. That I'm greedy. That I'm a failure. Are they wrong?" I asked softly. He froze, eyes flashing. "You're old, weak, pathetic. Without me you'll lose everything. Why can't you see that?" I stood, cane steady, and looked him in the eye. Because your mother left me everything I need. And she left you nothing but the chance to prove who you are. And you've proven it. He laughed bitterly. You think you've won because of that account? Because of a few papers? You won't always have them. One day you'll slip. Then he leaned close, his voice low and sharp. And when you do, I'll take everything. I let him leave without another word. But inside something hardened. Ethan was no longer just a son gone astray. He was a threat. And threats must be met with preparation. That night I called Mr. Gaines. It's time, I said. For what? For the other plan. The one Margaret left unfinished. He paused. Are you sure? Yes. Ethan believes silence means weakness. It's time to show him silence can also mean strategy. As I hung up, I looked around the quiet house. Margaret's picture on the mantel caught the lamplight. I felt her presence not as a ghost but as a partner still guiding me. Ethan thought the battle was about money. He didn't realize it was about legacy, dignity, and love. And he didn't realize that while he plotted his next move, I had already made mine. Courtrooms smell of dust and desperation. On the morning of the hearing, I entered with Margaret's folder tucked under my arm, my cane tapping against the marble floor. Ethan was already there, slick in another expensive suit he hadn't paid for, Karen beside him with that brittle smile she wore like a mask. He smirked when he saw me as if today would be his coronation. The judge called the session to order. Ethan's lawyer rose first, painting me as incompetent, confused, incapable. He spoke of forgetfulness and frailty, as though age were a crime. Ethan lowered his eyes for effect, pretending sorrow at my supposed decline, while Karen dabbed at her face with a tissue. When it was my turn, Mr. Gaines stood. Your Honor, what the petitioner presents is a story. What we present is evidence. I rose slowly, steadying myself with my cane, and faced the court. My wife knew me better than anyone, I said, my voice firm. And she knew our son. She foresaw what greed could do. She prepared for this moment long before her death. I handed the folder to Gaines, who placed it before the judge. Inside were Margaret's documents, notarized trust papers, her handwritten addendum, her signature. The judge read in silence, the room holding its breath. At last she looked up. This document leaves no doubt. Mrs. Warren created a separate account solely for her husband, outside of estate proceedings. She explicitly stated her husband was competent and that her son was not to inherit from it. This petition is dismissed. The gavel struck. Ethan's face drained of color. But I wasn't finished. Your Honor, I said, if I may. I motioned to Gaines, who produced another set of documents, Ethan's debts. Credit card bills, overdue loans and casino records. These, Gaines explained, show that Mr. Warren Jr. is not motivated by protection but by desperation. His debts exceed his assets. His petition was nothing more than an attempt to seize funds his mother intentionally denied him. The judge's gaze turned sharp. Mr. Warren, do you dispute these? Ethan stammered, his lawyer frozen. Finally he whispered, no. Then this court not only dismisses your petition, the judge said sternly, but assesses costs against you. Consider this a warning. Misuse of guardianship proceedings will not be tolerated. The gavel fell again, sealing Ethan's humiliation. Outside the courtroom, Ethan lunged at me. His voice was low, venomous. You ruined me. You think you've won because of some hidden account? This isn't over. I looked him in the eye. It is. Your mother made sure of it. His face twisted, but Karen tugged him away, shame burning across her cheeks. For once, Ethan had no audience left to impress. Days later, Mr. Gaines called me back to his office. He laid one final document on the desk. Your wife amended her will, he said. She wasn't only protecting the separate account. She left everything else to you as well, properties, investments, assets. To Ethan she left nothing. I read her words, written in her steady hand. To my son Ethan Warren, I leave nothing further, for I have seen his choices. This is not punishment but consequence. My chest ached. Margaret hadn't just left me security, she had left me justice. When Ethan found out, he came to my house like a storm. He slammed the door, eyes wild. You knew, he shouted. You knew she left me nothing. I sat in Margaret's chair, cane across my knees. I knew she left what was right. His face contorted. Do you realize what this means for me? I have debts, Those are yours, I said. Not hers. Not mine. I'm your son, he cried. You were, I answered quietly. But you chose greed over family. You tried to strip me of my dignity. And in the end, you stripped yourself of your inheritance. For once he had no words. He left, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. I never saw him again. Word later reached me that he'd fled town, debts chasing him, reputation ruined. Karen had left him too. He blamed me, but I knew the truth, he had undone himself. Life settled into a quiet rhythm. Neighbors stopped by with respect instead of pity. At church, friends clasped my hands and said, "You handled yourself with grace." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Because Margaret's silence had spoken louder than any of us. On the anniversary of her death, I laid lilies on her grave and whispered, "I kept your secret." I waited. I watched. And you were right. He revealed himself. And silence was enough. The wind stirred the trees, and for a moment, I swore I heard her laugh again, bright, unbroken. I stood straighter, cane tapping steady against the earth. Ethan had thought silence was weakness. He learned too late that silence can be strategy. Silence can be justice. And in the end, silence had been my final weapon.